In court later, Crean would say, quote, "I found her suffering, sir, simply from nervous excitement and bronchitis." After her death, he had also stated, quote, "She was perfectly healthy. She had a body of good physique and well-nourished. The only thing I can say is that she was awfully nervous." When asked to explain what he meant, he said, quote, "She had been attending to me for the last 8 or 9 years, and I always found her a nervous, irritable sort of a woman."
Oh, fuck off.
Yeah. So this woman has bronchitis. It is the late 1800s. They're in a very rural area, and he just aimlessly wandered over several days later and is like, well, she's being crazy. She's hysterical.
It's because she's a woman.
That's it. That's funnily enough, that will continue. Because on the same day that he had shown up, the priest in the neighborhood, and by neighborhood I mean 4 miles away also, had also come to visit and bless her. He had found her in a state where he started giving her last rites because she looked so ill, but also had said that she seemed nervous and hysterical.
She's sick as fuck.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God.
Bronchitis in the late 1800s. Okay, I guess that's just something you can get rid of like immediately, right? That's fine.
I had bronchitis back when I was at the bakery, and I'm a person who does not like to go to doctors, and that shit lasted for a month before I went to a doctor, and they made me go see somebody because I was sicker than a dog, and they were like, "We're genuinely scared for you, and you can't come back to work until you go to a doctor."
Right, because that shit's contagious.
Yeah, and I got like 4 different prescriptions for things that I was supposed to take. It was fucked up.
In prison, Michael would say later, quote, "Petitioner wishes to state that the medical director of the district was noticed to attend the deceased 6 days prior to her death. Locals in the area ever since have thought maybe it was some sort of ongoing tuberculosis, and that's why she was seeing him for about 8 or 9 years. But why wouldn't you go to a doctor when you live in the middle of nowhere and deal with chickens who are disgusting? Sorry, chicken lovers out there, but no.
That's right. You apologize to Mariah.
Barf. They're gross. They're made of poo.
I like when people fry them. Take a buttermilk bath first.
When Cleary had gone to see the doctor, he waited for the doctor to come back just in case he didn't actually go to see his wife. So he basically sat there and was like, well, if you're not going to go look at her, I'm going to wait here and make you look at her later. But while he was doing that, because it had taken so long and they said it was super dire circumstances, that's why they got the red card. That's why he had to do a home visit, because otherwise, obviously, he could bring her to the doctor. He had sent out a report to the people in the area that were responsible for the dispensary and the hiring of the dispensary, saying that he was ignoring the fact that they needed help immediately and was just going about his day and aimlessly wandering. When Crean had returned to the dispensary, Cleary had noticed that he was very drunk with his wife. And when he noticed Michael Cleary standing there, Crean had yelled at him. He was very unhappy about the fact that he was reported. And in my opinion, Crean only had gone to see Bridget when she was sick because he was reported to other people in the area. Fuck that guy. So much fuck that guy. After Bridget had eventually died, there was an order for Crean's dismissal on the grounds that he was drunk when he was visited by an inspector. So it happened so often that he was drunk while he was on calls. The inspector noted that, quote, "We respectfully and earnestly ask the local government board to rescind the document received by our honorary secretary, R.E., Dr. Crean. As on the day of Dr. Brown's visit, Dr. Crean was after a heavy morning's work, and that some morning performed a serious operation and had not even breakfasted at noon when the inspector had arrived. We are all aware that Dr. Crean has not been very strong lately. Consequently, a small portion of stimulants would cause him to be irritable and excitable."
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
So motherfucker be drunk, and clearly does not care for women.
Well, was he dabbling in drugs too? Like in medicine?
That's not noted, but it wouldn't be uncommon for the time period.
Well, when they said the whole thing about like stimulants.
Yeah. When they were starting to figure out that morphine is a very spooky thingy. It does mess with you quite a bit. The priest from the church had also said that it seemed as though Crean was drunk when he was attending to Bridget. By the way, 4 months after she died, and after he resigned, that motherfucker asked for a pension. And the government said, no,
nope.
Dude, fuck you.
Nope.
Good on that at least, but damn. He did prescribe medication to her, but at this point in time, another friend of the family, Dunn, he's basically a person that's very steeped in lore and stuff like that, and he's what would generally be considered a, quote, fairy doctor or a ferryman, which means that he was part of the oral tradition, and he believed mostly the stories of lore, and then continued to proceed as those were the truths.
Yeah.
So a lot of his practice as a person was herbal medicines and stuff like that, which is solid. Go holistic if you can. But
It's like homeopathic.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm down with it, but also treat yourself.
Yeah. Also, bronchitis.
When he had first seen Bridget laying in the state that she was in, which obviously contrary to Crean's diagnosis where she looked healthy and just had a touch of the bronchitis, which eventually he would also say was pneumonia. Don't know.
I mean, well, it could turn into pneumonia, though.
Yeah, but also neither of them is like a healthy looking state.
No, when you've got the pneumonies, you're real sick.
When he saw her, he said, "That's not Bridgie." He looked at her, and what would normally be responded as like, "That's not what you look like. Oh no, what happened to you?" He said, "That's not Bridgie," and apparently had been talking to Michael about the possibility of her in some sort of lore being a changeling.
Well, don't you know? I mean, that's the medical diagnosis.
Well, that's the thing is it seems to have maybe after the couple days that Michael was up with his wife and trying to take care of her and being super stressed out and having to walk and try to get the doctor and then dealing with her dad as well, it might have been something that just sparked something in Michael that because nothing else was working, that might be the answer.
Well, you were saying before that there was a theory that he had maybe had like a mental break. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I remember hearing about this was there was a lot of thought that he was potentially getting frustrated with her because she was so much more successful than him. And it was starting to look like he was getting a little bit embarrassed because she was the one that was pulling in all of the money.
So there is that thought process from Michael Cleary. There's also another account that says that she may have been cheating with their neighbor and had a relationship where she had a childless marriage with her husband and wasn't really feeling that whole situation. She was far more successful and far more driven than he was. But then there was another account that said that he was hyper abusive. And it's kind of backed up by some of the statements she makes later.
Yeah.
Which I'll get into in a second. But it is what it is. The remedies from the fairy doctors, fairy men, or fairy women most often had included foxglove, which in large doses
It's deadly nightshade, right? No, that's belladonna. Belladonna is deadly nightshade. Foxglove is a poison, though. Sorry, my bad. I'm a bad witch.
So, remedies from the fairy doctors, fairy men, or fairy women often included foxglove, which is in high doses a dangerous poison, as well as in smaller doses used as a cardiac medication, which is awesome. Sometimes it's referred to as a fairy thimble. Also, there's St. John's wort, which often, as with most things, even if they're good for you, in high doses can kill you or do something terrible to you.
But a lot of people use it as a natural antidepressant, too.
Correct. Sudden paralysis and cerebral hemorrhage is considered in this particular time period a fairy stroke. Tuberculosis was associated with abduction because now they can't survive on not fairy food. And anorexia was attributed to not eating because they weren't able to eat fairy food.
Like they couldn't eat human food, they had to eat fairy food?
Yeah. Postnatal depression was considered fairy fever, which was also treated by St. John's wort. After Michael had started to believe that Bridget was a changeling, he went and acquired herbs that he blended with new milk. We talked about this a little bit earlier, and force-fed it to her while a cousin was holding down one of her arms and pinning her to the bed. Another cousin was holding down her arm and pinning that side to the bed. Michael Kennedy was holding her down by her neck, and then another one of her family members was laying across her legs. One person in that room was holding a candle, and Michael Cleary was holding the pot and forcibly spoon-feeding her what he thought was the cure. She was being violently attacked, and when she wouldn't open her mouth, they had pressed a hot poker to her forehead.
Yeah, it's a bad time.
It's a bad time. After they had done this and they had thought suitably that they had gotten enough of the treatment in her mouth, they had relinquished her arms and held her up, but continued to keep her legs pinned down to the bed, and they shook her violently back and forth to, I guess, stir up all the stuff.
And maybe, I don't know, get rid of the changeling that was inside of her. Get out of there, you stupid bitch!
While they were doing that, they were repeatedly yelling at her and requiring her to answer questions, basically like an exorcism. Who are you? And she'd reply with her name, and when that wasn't suitable enough, they would shake her more violently and press her back into the bed and force feed her more.
Yeah.
Until finally, after the third treatment, they were satisfied with her having said that she was Bridget Cleary. At this point, they lifted her out of the bed, assuming that the changeling was probably still in her body and they had to chase it up the flue. They brought her to the kitchen. They held her over the kitchen grating on the fire, and then from there would drop her repeatedly on the hot iron to try to scare the changeling out of the chimney. Mm-hmm. At this point in time, her father was trying to hold her body up over the grating, but when Michael had told him to drop her, he dropped her onto the grating and it would singe her back. To the people that were there at the time, which was most family members, including her cousin Johanna, otherwise known as Hannah, her father willingly participated. In accordance to the family that was there, her body didn't burn or singe, and that the nightgown that she was wearing was actually brought into court later and only had a small singe on it. I don't know how that's possible.
Okay, but you also don't get to hold somebody over a fire.
But also,
that's not okay. Right, we don't do that.
Think of the other day when I accidentally grabbed the grating for the top of my stove when you were cooking tea. I didn't really burn from that, and it really didn't hurt or anything. It just, it burned a little bit, and I was like, oh gosh, oopsies. Okay, and then I put it back down.
Yeah, but that was something you did on accident too. I see what you're talking about with there wasn't really a whole lot of damage done, but also we don't forcefully hold somebody over a fire. Fuck off.
No kidding. Supposedly, people had heard, quote, "Take that, you rap. Take it, you old bitch, or I'll kill you. Take it, you witch."
So angry.
Dunn had held her ears down to the bed to hold her head down during this process as well. She kept telling them that the medicine was super bitter, and she tried to clamp her teeth together. Also, Johanna had come with the new milk and had demanded payment for it, something that Michael Cleary had thrown a hissy fit about because he didn't have a great relationship with that particular side of the family. By the time that they had laid her in her bed, her eyes were rolling around and she was raving, and everyone was delighted because they thought that the changeling had escaped up the chimney and they're going to get her back. At some point in time, they had changed her into dry clothes, and she seemed to be basically broken, her spirit and her will to be a person, for obvious reasons.
Gee, I wonder why.
She had indicated to the window and said there were police outside, so her husband had dumped a chamber pot on her.
Ew.
And then also
Gross.
The remainder had dumped out the window at whomever might be outside of the window. There's also another thought that she was saturated with a putrid liquid, possibly urine, or the feces from the hens, as all of those were intended to scare off any sort of supernatural premise.
Gross.
Yeah, it's not great.
So this is basically just the whole family getting together, but it's not a holiday. It's let's just torture a family member.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Basically.
Because at this point in time, Michael had been stating that she wasn't his wife, that she was too fine, that she was too tall, and she was not acting the way that it seemed as though she should act.
Oh, fuck off.
Right. He told people that he hadn't given her the medication that was prescribed from the doctor because it couldn't help her. Dunn had told him that he should have been administering the herbal medication to her on the 5th day. This is now almost the 8th. And that it may not take hold. He administered these things twice in the time of which she was alive. She was still super sick, but she seemed to be on the mend. And then the second time, they forced her to have medication. Simpson, the man that she was supposed to be in a relationship with, but also a close person to their house, and apparently someone that was very friendly with the both of them, had said, quote, "I remember the position she was in. I can see it all before me now. Her head was to the left of the grate, and her right hip rested on it. Her legs were partially projecting out." They said several times that she didn't seem to feel pain, which I could understand if she's crazy sick, and she probably is delirious because she probably has a fever, and people are mentally and physically torturing her.
Well, and also the other thing, too, is if you're really super sick, especially if this was pneumonia that we're talking about, which can make you very weak, if you don't have any energy left in you because you're that sick, how are you going to fight back or react? You're already so sick and have no energy.
Right.
To me, I feel like she's like a rag doll being thrown around.
Yeah, no, I feel that same thing. It's at this point in time where she starts making reference to Michael saying that she was a fairy, and some people think that she was buying into it just to make it stop. Because if there had been a history of abuse, which most people didn't see, then maybe it would make him treat that person who he thought was a fairy better, so he had the option of getting his wife back. Unfortunately, he had decided that at the stroke of midnight, it would be a permanent change. And if they didn't administer the medication and force her to answer to chase the changeling out, then he'd never get back his wife.
Yes, I do remember that because there was the whole thing about you have so many days, right? Yeah. So stupid.
Additionally, on the same night, Michael had received notice that his father had died a few towns over and that a wake was to be happening. Apparently, that was a time where there were like ghost stories and stuff like that.